All right. Well, Papa, well, let's start off by you saying your name and name of your sister and your parents.
Okay. Well, my name is Daniel Anton Foyt. My dad was Anton Foyt. My mother's name was Alice. I have one sister that's a year and a half older than I am. Her name is Dorothy Harris, lives in Austin. We were the only two children of Anton and Alice Foyt.
All right. Do you have any children?
I have four.
Sure enough.
I have 4 children. Of course, they're all grown now. 4 children, 9 grandchildren. And my oldest son, Daniel Jr. And I have David, who was a preemie, born preemie. I have a daughter named Kathy and a son named Darren. They all have their own families now.
Good, good. Tell us about their mom and when did y'all get married?
We got married in 1957. We met while at the University of Texas. We were both students there, and actually the way we met is kind of a cute story. I did not take very much when I was growing up. Here in the West, we usually just kind of hung out.
Sure.
But and when I went to University of Texas, I didn't really have time or the money to date, and social life wasn't that important to me at the time. But the house that I lived in, which was a co-op, was throwing a party, and I did not want to go, but a couple of my friends fixed me up with a sorority girl. And I said, "You're going to go to the party." So I decided to go to the party, but I didn't have a ride. So I asked one of the fellas that lived there if I could ride with him, double date with him. He said, "Well, I already got somebody double dating with us, but you can triple date if you want to." And I said, "Fine." Well, it just so happened that he had a date with Jane, who I later married. That's where I met her. And I was quite taken by her at that party. I did not dance with her that night, but we sat at the same table and we talked a lot. At any rate, after that, I didn't see her for several months, and we were going to have there was going to be another party, and this time I wanted to go and I wanted to take her. But I was kind of afraid to call her because I wasn't sure she'd remember me. And as it happened, one of the fellas that lived with us had a girlfriend that lived at Kirby Hall, which is where Jane lived. And so I said, "Well, ask your girlfriend to ask her for me." So she did. And Jane said she'd go with me. Barely remembered me. And that was our first date. There's actually a picture of us on our first date at that party. After that, I took her to it was close to the end of the school year, I took her to the band awards banquet, and we have a picture of that. That was about our 3rd date, I think. And then she went to summer school, and I actually had a job in Idaho for that summer. I was going to work for the Forest Service in Idaho, and I had already made plans to go, but after I met her, I did decide I didn't want to go there, that I would go to summer school so we could be together and date. And so I gave up that job and got the job at 2J Hamburgers, and that's how I got started in there, and that's largely because of her. And we dated for that summer, and got married the following summer.
What year did y'all meet?
That would have been 1956.
Okay. And then you got married in...
We got married in August of 57.
57. What do you remember about living in Austin in the late 50s?
Austin was a nice, big town, or a little city, one or the other. Of course, I was mostly around the campus, I didn't have a car. I didn't get around that much, although I did get around because friends of mine had cars. But there was not a lot of industry in Austin at the time. Austin has changed just dramatically since I lived there. I think the population of the university was about 20,000 when I started, and it's probably triple that now or more. And the population of the town was 250,000, and I understand it's well over 1 million now. So it's just grown from a nice small town to a huge big city. And I understand it's got some of the big city problems now that we didn't have when I was going to school there.
You do sound like an old Austinite.
Yeah.
So you started living nearby the campus.
I actually, yeah, it's funny the way I got to go there, because I wasn't going to go to college because I didn't think my parents could afford to send me. And if I did go to college, my first choice would have been Notre Dame, but I couldn't afford to go there. So I had decided to join the Air Force when I got out of college. And then, lo and behold, I was valedictorian in my high school class and got a scholarship to a state university. So I decided to try to go to the University of Texas. But I needed a cheap place to live because Mom and Dad didn't have a lot of money to spend on me. So a friend of mine and I went to Austin early that summer. And
what year? What summer was that?
this would have been in '54. I graduated from high school in '54. So early that summer we went to Austin, and a friend of ours was living there, already going to school there. He lived in Newman Hall, which is the Catholic hall there for the kids. And we stayed with him, spent 2 or 3 days there, walking around campus, and we were applying at different co-ops, because I knew a co-op was the most economical place to live. And then after about 3 days, his dad picked us up and brought us back. Shortly after that, I got a letter from Talon Co-op, where was one of the places I had applied. And I got accepted. Actually, I think I got accepted to a couple of co-ops, but I decided I liked that one. And so I enrolled there. It was $50 a month, room and board, and 3 meals a day, except on Sunday. And so I took my scholarship, which was a 1-year scholarship, and packed up my trunk, and Mom and Dad drove me to Austin and dropped me off, and all of a sudden, the small town boy was in college. And it was, looking back on it now, I didn't really put a lot of time and research into it. It just kind of happened.
Yeah. So where's is that co-op right by the campus?
It was actually when I first started. They had 2 houses. One house was on Nueces Street, which is I think about a block off campus, and the other house, the one I lived in, was on Rio Grande, which is about 2 blocks off campus. Those 2 houses were about a block apart. And then the second year I was there, we all moved into one house. And there were about 40 of us in that co-op. We did our own, we had chores and duties. We cleaned, we cooked our own breakfast. We hired a cook to cook the rest of the meals. But
and you did your homework too.
yes, yes, we did our homework, and it was like one big family. And, made a lot of friends there.
What did you study?
I was majored in chemical engineering. I went to college for 3 years, and then after Jane and I got married, I went for 1 semester, and then I dropped out because I was offered a good job. And I stayed out of college for 3 years. And after that, I had decided that I had put in too much of an investment just not to get my degree. So I went back to school for two and a half more years and got my degree. I actually have something like 160 hours of credit at the University of Texas.
What job did you drop out for?
When I began working at that TJ hamburger place that summer, At the end of that summer, I continued working there part-time. I was going in around midnight and cleaning the place up and washing the windows and scrubbing the floor, which was a pretty good part-time job. I worked about 3 hours a night. Then I'd also work on weekends, on Sunday. And I was beginning to start making my own money and helping Mom and Dad pay the bills. The following summer, I worked full-time, and when we got married, I asked for a full-time job. And evidently I must have been pretty good at what I did, because they offered me the manager's job. And offered me $350 a month to be the manager. That's more money I'd ever seen in my life. So I took the job, and one of the conditions was that I drop out of school for 1 semester. And so that's kind of the way that happened.
Okay. And then you stayed in the restaurant business, or?
I stayed in the restaurant business. When I decided to go back to school, I talked to my boss, and I told him what my thoughts were. And I said, I don't think I can do both. I don't think I can go to college and manage this place. And at that time, they had gotten the Kentucky Fried Chicken franchise and were planning to expand. They didn't want me to quit because I was doing a good job for them. And so my boss said, let's give it a try. Go to college, and we'll cooperate with you. And if it looks like you're not doing the job, we can go from there. But just to be sure, Jane got a job, just in case our income dwindled. But as it turned out, my boss told me over those 2.5 years, I did the best job I ever did for him. And I guess I learned how to use my time, because I didn't have time to waste. When I was working, I concentrated on my job. When I was studying, I concentrated on my studying. Managed to have 2 kids during that process. Mm-hmm. And after I got out of college, I decided I didn't really want to go into engineering, because I was making, by then, I was making too much money. I would have had to take a cut in salary to go into engineering. And I was actually offered an engineering job in Houston, but I turned it down. And right after that, the people that owned that business sold the business to their son. And he, one of the conditions of him buying the business was that I stay with the business. And he talked to me, and I told him I'd stay, and he immediately doubled my salary. So I went on from there.
There you go. What part of town were you working in and living in at that time? When you had the 2 kids?
Part of town I was living in was northwest Austin, down where Capitol Plaza is, in behind there in the northwest section of town. We had bought a house about a year after we got married, lived there for a number of years, and then we bought a bigger house a little further west, and lived there until 1970. That's when we decided to go into business for ourselves, and that's when we moved to Longview.
Before I move on, where in Northwest Austin? Do you remember the names of the streets?
The street, the first house I think was Windsor Lane. The second house was on Lansbury, 2600 Lansbury.
And do I remember correctly, you rode a motorcycle to work?
Right after we got married, when we first got married, we were living in a 1-room apartment, and we had 1 car. And Jane was working at the Department of Public Safety, so I would take her to work every morning. Then I would go to school. Then I would go to work. Then if I had a lab, I'd go back to school. Then at 5 o'clock, I'd pick her up, and she'd drive me to work. And I'd work till about 11 o'clock at night, and then she'd drive down and pick me up. So we were doing a lot of driving back and forth. Couldn't afford 2 cars, but I could afford a motorcycle. So I bought a motorcycle and let her have the car, and I rode the motorcycle.
when y'all went into business in the 70s, you were managing KFCs or?
Well, I was working for Ralph Moreland Restaurants then, and he had 17 different restaurants. We had 5 Kentucky Fried Chicken restaurants. I had the 2 J's. At that time, Sandy's down on Barn Springs Road was under my umbrella. We had the Convict Hill restaurant, which I think is still there. Of course, he owned the Holiday Houses. And he had 2 general managers. I was one of them. And it was a good job. I mean, I was not only making a good salary, I had a company car and a lot of perks. But I wanted to go into business for myself, so I gave it all up and took the plunge.
Tell me about that.
Well, I couldn't decide where to go into business. I didn't really want to stay in Austin because I didn't want to compete with the man I was working for. Although I had some opportunities to buy some locations in Austin. I didn't have a lot of money, but what I did have was good credit and a good reputation. And I really wanted to go to business in Corpus Christi, but Hurricane Carla kind of canceled that for me and wiped out most of Corpus Christi. So I had a friend that lived in Tyler that was in the hamburger business, and I drove up to East Texas to visit him and made a deal there to put in a hamburger place like he had in Longview. And coincidentally, the landlord that I was going to have was the fellow that had the Kentucky Fried Chicken business. I had made an attempt to buy the Kentucky Fried Chicken stores in Lake Charles, Louisiana, but after visiting there, I didn't really want to live in Louisiana, so especially Lake Charles. So we ended up just taking the plunge. I mean, we sold our house, moved to Longview. I wrote a letter to the president of the bank there and told him I needed $15,000 to go into the restaurant business. And I look back on it now, I'm surprised he didn't run me out of the bank. This restaurant business has a lot of failure. But I put my resume down. We moved to Longview, and I went to see him, and he says, "I'll loan you the money." So we went in on a prayer and $15,000. That's how we got into business.
What year did you move there?
I think it was 1970, if I'm not mistaken.
Did you bring all your kids and your family too?
Brought the whole family. We sold our house in Austin, lived with their mother-in-law for about 2 months. I went down there first and got things going, and then went back to Austin, picked up the family, and we rented a truck and put all of our belongings there. Rented a house and opened a business. Actually went broke and didn't have sense enough to quit. So we just kept working, and after a couple of years, well, the next year I also rented another restaurant, a full-service restaurant called the Triangle, and ran it for a year. It wasn't very successful, and then my landlord offered to sell me one of the Kentucky Fried Chicken stores, and by then I didn't have the money to buy it. And so I worked a deal with him. He liked me and liked the job I was doing in my other restaurant. So I made a deal with him to pay him out over a period of 3 years. And I got into I bought that restaurant from him. And then a couple of years later, Kentucky Fried Chicken wanted a 3rd location in Longview. And they had approached me about putting it in, and I didn't have the money to do it. My landlord had the money, and my partner, but he didn't really want to do it, so we went in on a partnership. He said he'd put up the money if I ran it. So we put in a 3rd location. Then a couple of years later, his daughter was in a very bad accident, and she was maimed for life, and he just gave up the business and sold out completely to me, so I ended up owning all of the Kentucky Fried Chicken franchise. And I almost bought the one in Kilgore while I was there. That's the one that it's probably most famously known for the robbery and the murders. In fact, the assistant manager that got murdered that night was a lady that I had hired into the business.
Wow.
So I had some close connections with that.
You worked with Kentucky Fried Chicken for a while after that, right? You met Colonel Sanders.
Oh, I knew Colonel Sanders back when I was in Austin. Yes, I knew the Colonel real well. He had 2 daughters. I knew both of the daughters. One of his young men that married one of his granddaughters actually worked for me in Austin for a few months. He'd come down there just to gain some experience as far as management is concerned. And so the Colonel would come down to visit his granddaughter, and I got to chauffeur him around, and I knew Colonel Sanders extremely well, yes.
That's amazing. What were your grandparents' names?
Well, I don't remember my grandfather from the Foyt side, because he died the year before I was born. I remember my grandmother. She lived with us until I was in the 5th grade. She couldn't speak English. She spoke Czech. So, of course, I spoke fluent Czech at home. But my mother and dad were always made sure that I also could learn to speak English. But my grandmother pretty well took care of my sister and I while Mom and Dad worked. And I just remember she was a big lady, and I remember when I was little, I remember crawling under that feather bed with her. It was nice and warm.
What was her name?
Her name was Amelia Foyt.
Amelia Foyt. And what was her husband's name?
Her husband's name was Anton, but like I say, I never knew him. He died. Now the Klaczynskis, I remember my grandfather, Joseph Klaczynski, a little bit. He had a shoe shop in downtown West, and that's back before they used to recobble shoes. You know, you wear shoes out, you didn't go down and buy a new pair, you put new soles on the shoes that you had, and that's what he was doing, repairing shoes. I remember being in his shop, and I was pretty small. I think I was 5 years old when he died. I remember his funeral. I remember they had the casket at the house, and I remember that. They lived over on the north part of town. I'm not even sure where the house is now. But that's about the only memory I have of him. Now, my grandmother, Pearl, her name was Gurney before she married him. She lived with my Aunt Helen and Uncle Anton. She and Aunt Helen lived together until Aunt Helen got married, and then she lived with them when they lived here in the West, and then after they moved to Fort Worth, she moved to Fort Worth with them. And she passed away, it was in the 60s. I don't remember the exact date, about the mid-60s is when she passed away. She had 5 children. That was, my mother was second oldest. My mom had 2 sisters, Aunt Helen and Mary, and she had 2 brothers, John and Tony, and they moved here from South Texas, as I recall from hearing Mother talk about it, because Grandpa was real sick. He had asthma, and they moved here to go to work in that cotton mill, and Mom went to work when she was really young. Uncle Tony kind of took care of the family.
They moved to West, the Klaczynski family?
Yeah, they moved to West, and Mom went to work in that mill, and that's where she met Dad.
Okay, so Joe and Pearl Klaczynski had 5 kids.
Right.
What was their order?
I believe Mary, I think, was the oldest. That was Julius's mother. And then Mom was second oldest. I believe I'm getting this right.
Take your time.
And then Tony, and then John, and then Helen. Helen was the youngest.
Dad, Dorothy remembers it different. She says your mom was oldest.
She may be right. She may be right. I'm not.
Okay.
I'm not real sure. I know they're 1 and 2, but I couldn't remember which one was.
Cool.
Okay.
And then, did they ever talk about growing up and their experiences, the Joe and Pearl?
I never talked to Grandma too much about it. If she did, she didn't talk about it to me. Grandma Klaczynski didn't really like to take care of her grandchildren. She wasn't a mean lady or anything. She just didn't like being around kids.
Yeah.
And she still spoke a lot of Polish, which I didn't understand. So I never really got real close to her. I mean, I was around her, but I never really got close with her. I talked to her a lot.
Mm-hmm. Do you remember any stories about your aunts and uncles?
Oh, I have, as far as the Klaczynski side is, my Uncle Frank, my Aunt Mary, rather, who married Uncle Frank, and who's my cousin Julius. Now, there were 7 cousins from that Klaczynski family. And Tony had 2 children. They're still both living, Angeline and Marcy. Mom had 2, Dorothy and me. And then John had 2. They're living in Fort Worth now. There was Jill Ann and I can't remember the other one.
It's not Sharon?
Sharon, yeah, Sharon.
Oh.
Yeah, I hadn't seen them in many, many years.
Sure.
Sharon and Jill Ann. Anyway, and then there was Julius. So there were 7 of us cousins. 6 of us are still living. Julius passed away about a year and a half ago. Now on the other side, on my daddy's side, this is kind of odd. My Uncle Charlie, Daddy had 2 brothers, Charlie and John. John had 3 children. John was the oldest. 2 of the children are passed away. My cousin John Henry and my cousin Angeline are on that side. My cousin Millie is still alive. She lives here in the West. On Uncle Charlie's side, he had 3 children. The 2 girls have passed away, and the boy, Tommy, is still living. And so the only ones left on that side of the family are Tommy, Millie, and Dorothy and I on that side of the family. Now, the odd thing about that family is there were 3 girls. None of the girls had any children. The 3 boys had children, but the 3 girls didn't have children. And my sister and I think that this kind of goes into place because I know that my son, David, and my daughter, Kathy, had trouble with having children. And I think it stems from the Foyt side of the family, and probably may be the reason that those girls didn't have any children. I really don't know, but Dorothy and I have talked about this, and it seems kind of odd that there were 7 children with the 3 boys, but no children with the girls.
So can you remind me and build the tree again? On the Foyt side.
On the Foyt side, okay. My dad had 2 brothers and 3 sisters. The 2 brothers were Charlie and John. John was the oldest. Charlie was younger than Dad. Then there were 3 girls, Albina, Millie, and
Lucy.
Albina.
Lucy.
Lucy, Albina, and Millie. Millie was the youngest. Okay, Lucy was the one that had the wooden leg. None of those had any children. My Aunt Millie, who was quite the youngest, I didn't see for, the last time I remember seeing her was, I was a young kid, and then she came to Daddy's funeral. I saw her then. but I hadn't seen them in a long time.
Did they all live in West, or
No,
how did they end up here?
Aunt Millie lived in Dallas. She was actually a maid for Helen Keller. You remember Helen Keller, the blind one?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, she actually worked for her. My Uncle Jake was the chauffeur for them. We went to see them. I've been on Helen Keller's estate. We went to see them.
What was their last name?
Raycheck, Jake and Millie Raycheck. Now, I was real young when this happened. And then Albina, they lived in Colorado. And her husband Betsetta. Her husband got killed in he was worked in construction and Caterpillar turned over on him and killed him. But I didn't see them since I was maybe 6, 7 years old. Maybe a little older than that. But none of those girls had children. So there were the 3 boys, John. John lived in Ross. Charlie lived in Corpus Christi.
How did your dad come to West? Why did he come here?
Now that I'm not sure. His dad, my grandfather, who I said, I never met my grandfather and I didn't know too much about him, but when I was led to understand that he was quite into investing and farming, and that there was some farmland here and he wanted to, somehow he invested and that's why they came here. I don't know the whole story behind that, but I understand he was quite a character as far as wanting to, as an immigrant that was wanting to get ahead. And he had actually immigrated into this country. My grandmother was, I think, 12 years old when she came over, and he was probably about the same.
Wow. I'll be...
Hey, can we back up on building this family tree?
Yeah.
Who was Lucy married to?
God, what was her husband's name? Then I should have written these down.
Do we have it? Do we have the family tree?
I may have it somewhere. Let me look.
Lucy.
Okay, talk about John. Who was he married to, and what were his kids' names?
Uncle John.
Yeah. Foyt.
John Foyt had 3 children. Angeline, John Henry, and Millie. Millie is still living. John Henry's passed away, and Millie's passed away. Uncle Charlie had 3 children, Lorraine, Dolores, and Tommy. Lorraine and Dolores are deceased. Tommy's still living. He lives in Corpus Christi, or Robstown. And my uncle's name, Lucy's husband, Henry Bessetta. Henry Bessetta. That's who it was, yeah. They had gotten kind of an odd story, but there was some sort of a family dispute that I never really got into because I was too young to understand it. But my dad's siblings had got into some family dispute, and I think it was about grandmother's estate. And grandmother didn't have anything, but my mom and dad had taken care of my grandmother, and I think the other family thought that she may have left them a lot of money or something. But anyway, there was a dispute. And the last thing I remember about my Uncle Henry and my Aunt Lucy was they came over to the house one night, and I was listening to the radio. I was listening to Joe Louis, the boxer, listening to the fight. And Mom and Dad and Henry and Lucy were in that back bedroom having a fight of their own because they were arguing about something. And then eventually Henry and Lucy walked through the house. Mom and Dad walked behind them. They walked out to their car, said some unkind words to each other, and they drove off, and I never saw them again after that. But I really, at that time, I didn't really care. Didn't really want to know what was going on. I was little, and that was their business. So.
Sure.
John's wife's name. John Foyt's wife's
John's
name.
Foyt's
and
wife,
their children.
her name was Mary.
Anita.
Anita, yeah, and I'm thinking about somebody. Anita, yeah.
Yeah, no worries.
I remember when she died, Uncle John committed suicide.
So Uncle John married Anita. And did they have any kids?
Yeah,
Did
they
you say
had
that already?
Millie,
Sorry.
who's still
Oh,
living,
yeah.
and Angeline and John Henry.
And it's a different Angeline than.
It's a different Angeline. And there's Angeline Klajinsky that's still living.
Yeah.
Angeline Foyt passed away. But yeah, John lived in Ross, but he and Dad never spoke after that. Uncle John would drive by the house, wouldn't stop. And then I never really knew him. I went to school with Millie. She was in my class. She sat right behind me in school. But Uncle John, I understand he got cancer and couldn't face it, so he committed suicide.
Yeah.
You remember Anita's maiden name?
No, I sure don't.
Millie and Angeline, did they get married?
Millie married Johnny Kostechka.
Robert.
That's right, that's Johnny's brother. Yeah, I am getting confused. Robert Kostechka. Angeline got married, but I honestly don't remember her name.
His name.
Her last name.
Oh, Drozd.
What was it?
Drozd.
Really? I don't know. I lost track of her after high school.
Okay, and then let's move over to Charlie real quick. I just want to build this family tree. And
Sure.
then we can get there. Charlie married Prohaska. So.
That's what. Yeah, married. That's what I was.
So who did Charlie married who?
Can you repeat it? Like say
Charlie married Mary, and what was her last name? I don't remember.
Prohaska.
Prohaska. Okay.
And they had how many kids?
They had 3 children. They had Lorraine, Dolores, and Tommy. Tommy was the youngest. Lorraine passed away in Austin about a few years ago. Dolores was living, I think, in West Virginia. Dorothy had talked to them, but I hadn't. And Tommy is still living. He lives in Robstown.
Where?
Robstown, which is right outside of Corpus Christi. Now, he's got some children, but I don't know. I hadn't seen Tommy since he was a baby.
All right. I think that does it for the family tree. I mean, unless you, Ellen.
I was going to ask if you remember how your parents met.
I remember Mom telling the story. I think they met on Main Street in West. I think she was walking on the street and he passed by in his car and introduced. I think. I do know that they made a date and Mom forgot the date. And beyond that, I don't really know too much about him. Now, Mom talked to Dorothy about that, but I never discussed it with Mom.
So they must have gotten married here in town, though.
I think so.
At St. Mary's, or
I would guess it was at St. Mary's. Well, I mean, at the Church of the Assumption, the old church. Yeah.
the old church. Yeah. And then they had that. They bought that place on Main Street. That's not there anymore.
Well, they
Right.
rent it from
They
there.
rent.
They rented that one, yeah. And then they bought this one on 407.
What jobs did they do, or kind of?
Well, Mother worked at the cotton mill. I think she was working at the cotton mill when they met. Dad came off the farm. And when they got married, he went to work at the cotton mill. They both worked at the cotton mill. My Grandmother Foyt, took care of us, my sister and I. And then Dad got that job at General Tire. And when he started working there, Mom quit the job at the cotton mill closed. My Uncle Tony, Mom's brother, was a foreman at that cotton mill. He left West after the mill closed and moved to Fort Worth and went to work for this ring and seal company. And my Uncle John and my Uncle Anton Pija followed him to Fort Worth, and they all went to work for that company. And Uncle Tony died, he died young. I think he was 59 when he passed away.
What year were you and Dorothy born?
I was born in 1936. Dorothy was,
Yeah, don't worry about it.
Dorothy was born in 1935. She was born in October, I was born in April, so she is, 35 or 34. She's a year and a half older than I am.
Gotcha. Cool. Yeah, it must be 34.
34, and I was born in 36. Yeah.
Right, because she just turned 80 this year. So, what was it like growing up in West?
Hey, I'm sorry. Hey, before you go on there, can you talk a little bit about what your parents talked about in the Depression?
Oh
I
yeah.
want to
About
get
what?
that in.
What your folks remember, or stories you remember your folks saying about living and growing up in the Depression?
Oh, okay. I don't remember a lot, but my dad hardly ever talked about it. Mom would talk about it because evidently the Klaczynskis were very, very poor. Now, how they actually ended up here, I don't know. I just know that my grandfather was really sick. He had asthma. He couldn't work. That's why Mom had to go to work when she was like 12 years old. And I remember her talking about that, and this was during the Depression. How it affected the people here in West, I really can't say. Probably not as bad as the rest of the country, because people in West were already poor. That's maybe a bad analogy, but people around here were basically farmers, and they were survivalists. And I know when Mom and Dad, when they bought this house here, Dad bought 3 lots, 2 of them became gardens. We grew our own food, we grew our own vegetables. We raised chickens, we raised hogs, killed a hog every fall. Had our own eggs. The only time we went to the grocery store was for sugar and flour, and I remember during the war things were rationed. A lot of stuff was rationed. So they never. Mom would mention the Depression, but I don't think the Depression hit them near as hard as it did, because they were already so poor that they couldn't get any poorer.
Right.
But yeah, they had a very hard life, very hard life.
How many people, how big do you think the town of West was when your folks met and then for you growing up?
The city limit sign that I remember reading when I was growing up was around 2,200. It's about 2,700 now. It hadn't changed a whole lot. Because population hadn't changed that much. The makeup of the town has changed. It used to be pretty much a Czech community. It's not so much now. Because you look in the phone book and you see a lot of names that aren't Czech anymore. Mm-hmm. But it's still basically, at one time there were 3 cotton gins here. There's none now. Still agriculture. There's a lot of small business here. That, of course, the cotton mill is closed. That was the big industry here. There used to be a sewing factory here, and it's closed. People that do work in Waco or Hillsboro or our own small business here in West.
What was it like growing up here?
What memories do you have growing up here? What was it like?
Well, like I say, up until the time I was about 9 years old, I just remember we didn't have much, but I didn't miss much because we didn't know what we didn't know. And I think I've already mentioned this. We didn't have indoor plumbing. We didn't have hot water. We finally got electricity, which was a cord with a light bulb hanging off the ceiling. Didn't have a refrigerator. Didn't have a freezer. We grew our own food. I had to do chores from the time I remember. Feed the hogs, feed the chickens, mow the yard. And that wasn't with an electric lawnmower either. When we trimmed the grass around the edges, it was hand clippers. And so I did chores from the time that ever since I can remember. Dad made us work. Saturday was wash day. He'd bring out the washing machine, put it in the middle of the yard, and the whole family would do laundry. We'd hang it out on the line and let it dry and pick it up. Mom would sort it and iron what she needed to. She didn't have an electric iron. She had the iron that you put on the stove to heat. So like I said, it sounds pretty primitive, but that's the way life was. We did do we didn't have a telephone, we didn't have television, but we did a lot of visiting. I mean, we would go out every Sunday practically. We'd go out to visit somebody, or we'd just walk over to somebody's house, or a neighbor would come over and we'd just sit on the yard and talk. Dad loved to fish. My Uncle Anton loved to fish, so a lot of Sundays we would go out to the river, to Spivey or Man's Crossing at the river, and they'd fish all day. And my mother and my aunt would bring fried chicken and, serve a picnic lunch, and my sister would sit there and fret because she didn't want to be there, and I would run around and just enjoy the heck out of it, get all bitten up by mosquitoes and everything, but it was fun.
What else did you guys do for fun? I remember you.
Well, as I got where I could get away from my parents, I got a bicycle when I was fairly young, and there were kids in our neighborhood that were always hanging out, and we'd ride our bicycles up and down Main Street. Then later on, just all around town. I remember a friend of mine had a paper route back then. That's what papers got delivered, was a young kid on a bicycle throwing them on the yard. And we would go and ride his paper route with him. We'd have to meet at the station when the paper came in and help him either roll them or fold them so they could be thrown. And we would help him and then ride around. He had probably about 40 papers that he threw. I got to know his route so well that whenever he needed to go on vacation or something, I would take over his paper route with him. I didn't get paid for it, I just did it because he was a friend of mine. We did played a lot of touch football on that field right by the railroad tracks. Spent a lot of time on the railroad tracks. For some reason, that was kind of like a magnet. We dug caves into the side of the little hill there by the tracks. Well, they had a train wreck here when I was probably 11 years old or so. We got to climb up into one of the steam engines, and we just did things that any kid just to have fun.
What's that story about the train wreck that happened right outside the house on Main Street?
Yeah, it happened right in front of the house, as a matter of fact. A train derailed, and I think 8 cars fell off the track. And you see where the track is elevated? The cars came sliding down. One of them slid almost to Main Street, right in front of the house. That particular night, my dad and my sister and I were at my aunt's, Anton and Helen Peacock's house down here on Harrison Street. And we got home, it was already dark. And as we crossed over the track, we saw all the lights and the red blinking lights, and saw the cars there in the ditch, and said, oh my gosh, wonder what this. Well, it was obviously there was a train wreck. And so we pulled into the driveway, although there were police cars in it. And we walked in the house. Mom was sitting there listening to the radio. And And we walked in, and I remember Dad said, "What happened?" And she said, "What are you talking about?" She wasn't even aware of it. But that wasn't unusual because when the trains came by, they made so much racket. I guess this just wasn't unusual for her.
Yeah.
Which was, that was one of the nice things about living there with all that. When the trains came by, they actually rattled the house. But we didn't have to worry about company staying with us overnight. Nobody wanted to spend the night with us.
Well, wouldn't it be neat if there were a train driving by right now?
I know, how convenient. That's funny. What high school did you go to?
I went to West High School, the Trojans.
Trojans.
Went from 1950 to 1954.
Where did you go to school before that?
St. Mary's Catholic School. Went there for 8 years.
Okay.
And, that's when the nuns were still teaching there.
Were you a good student, Papa?
I graduated at the top of my class out of St. Mary's. And I was valedictorian in high school. Now, I don't know if that says I was a good student or we just had a lot of bad students behind me.
Do you remember a lot of your teachers? And
Oh, I remember most of my teachers, yes, yes. So, and I got along pretty much with all of my teachers. I think I was kind of blessed because we had some really good teachers at the high school. Teachers who were serious about teaching. I've been in that teaching business from both sides. And
yeah.
Remember any of your teachers?
Yeah. Do you remember any of their names though, or?
oh yeah, I took vocational agriculture as I was a freshman. Mr. Ned Bollick. The reason I took vocational agriculture is I wanted to belong to the FFA because they got to make the trip to State Fair every year, and I wanted to go with them. So I took, and I was one of his top students because most of those were farmer boys and they didn't really care about learning. But yeah, I remember Mr. Ned. His son was also a good friend of mine, played in the band with me. And then I remember Miss McCluskey, who was my freshman English teacher. And all the kids hated her. She was mean, but she was a good teacher. Miss Posrell was the assistant principal, and she taught my English 4. Mr. King was my algebra teacher. Miss Mosier, bless her heart, was my chemistry teacher. Loved her to death. She was just great. And Miss Tipton taught civics. And I still remember she would read the congressional record to us every morning. You know, what happened in Congress today. She'd have that congressional record. She'd read it to us. But I think I learned more about government from her than I did from taking government in college. She was she made it real interesting. And then I had Mr. Voracek for English 2. She introduced me to Carl Sandburg. You know who Carl Sandburg was, right? Okay, he was a poet from way back there, poet laureate.
Oh.
And Dorothy and I were talking about this the other day. Who's the most famous person you've ever met in your life? Well, Carl Sandburg is mine. That's Mr. Voracek introduced him to me one time.
I'll be.
We went to one of his presentations at Baylor University, and she took me backstage and introduced me to him.
Man.
But yeah, Mr. McDonald was our band teacher.
So you were in band.
I was in the band for 4 years here. Mr. Mac had just come to West in 1950, and he's rebuilding that band, and so they were looking for volunteers, and they drafted me in there. I played a tenor sax because they happened to have one, and then my mom and dad bought me my own. But Yeah, I played tenor sax. I made All-State my senior year, and loved it.
Did y'all play at the football games and things like that?
We played and we marched at the football games. My dad was real proud of me being in that band. He used to come to the, he wouldn't come to the game, but he would stand outside behind that fence and watch us march. And that always made me feel good. But yeah, I love being in the band. Love it. Yeah, when I went to college, of course, I played in the Longhorn band for 3 years.
Wasn't it in a high school class that you saw the Lake Whitney before they put the dam in?
Yes.
Can you tell
was-
that story?
Sure, that was my freshman year when Mr. Ned Bollick. He took a group of us in his vocational agriculture class to Clifton. They were having, I don't know if it was a fair or something going on in Clifton, and he took us it was a field trip. And we went in that old school station wagon. I still remember. It was about 6 of us went with him. And coming back, he went through Hillsboro, or through Whitney rather, and he stopped and showed us where they were building the dam, and you could see where the river was and where the lake was going to be. And he described all that to us about what was going to happen when they got the dam finished. Yes, I remember that very well. Yeah.
I can't imagine. Do you have any other high school memories or memories from your grade school?
Prom.
Ooh, like prom?
Well, I remember 2 things about when you say prom. We had a junior-senior prom. And I went to the prom when I was a junior. I did not go when I was a senior. But the band also put on a ball, which was kind of like a prom, a formal. Now, formal in West doesn't mean tuxedos. Formal in West means you wore a tie. But we put on a band ball every year. And this might be an interesting story. I turned 16 when I was a sophomore in high school. Turned 16 that April. I went to get my driver's license, started applying that summer. I passed my written test, but I flunked the driving test twice. Now, I've been trying to remember this, and I think this happened about Christmas time, because I remember it was in the winter. But the band ball was going on. I had my first date with a girl from ABBA named Patsy Novotny. That's another story. I didn't have my driver's license to go pick her up. But I was going to go take my driving test that day. The band ball was that night. I had my first date. Well, it just so happened, I passed my driving test.
Oh, goodness.
I took the car by myself for the first time. I had my first date of my life. Went to my first formal ball and got my first goodnight kiss, all on the same day.
I never knew that story.
And that's just. But Patsy Novotny was a young girl that had gone to St. Mary's School when I was in the 4th grade. She came with us, and I remember all the boys thought she was so cute, and she was. But she only went to school here at St. Mary's for like a year or 2, and she was in Abbott, and I lost track of her. I mean, I ran into her in Hillsboro. She was working as she got to be a teenager, and she was working at the 5 and Dime store in Hillsboro. Mom and Dad and I would go to Hillsboro and go shopping periodically, and I just happened to run into her. The band ball was coming up. I didn't have a girlfriend, so I asked her for a date, and she accepted. So that was my first date.
Wow.
And I was kind of bashful when I asked her. As it was, I also took her to the junior prom. And I think you have that picture of me and her at the junior prom. Dorothy says you do.
I got it. Yeah.
Did y'all hold the prom or your ball at the gym or?
Yes, at the gym.
At the gym, and then.
Now, the reason I didn't go when I was a senior is not because I didn't want to, it's because I didn't have a date. But like I said, I didn't date hardly any when I was in school. We hung out with some friends. But when prom day came around, there was one girl in particular that I wanted to ask. She was in my class. Her name was Mary Drews. And Mary and I we had never dated. We kind of hung out together on our senior trip. She had had a steady boyfriend the year before, but he graduated. And I wanted to ask her to the prom, but I waited and waited and waited, and finally at the last minute I asked her, and she already had a date. She would have gone if I'd asked her earlier, but she already had a date. And almost anybody else that I wanted to go with already was taken by then. So I didn't have anybody to ask that I really wanted to go with, so I just didn't go. So I didn't go to my senior prom.
Y'all took a senior trip though? I didn't
We
know
took
that.
a senior trip. That was my first time I went to Austin. I climbed to the tower and looked out the tower on our senior trip. We spent most of our time in Galveston, down on the beach.
Nice.
And that was our senior trip, yes.
Yeah, that's great. I wanted you to say something about all the movie theaters and some of the old places that aren't around town anymore.
Okay, the movie theater, the best theaters, was there ever since I can remember. And back in the 40s and the early 50s, there were a lot of westerns. Roy Rogers, Gene Autry, Cisco Kid, and probably all had the same storyline. When you see them now, you think, wow, you know. But back then, we thought that was the greatest thing. There were a lot of musicals, and like I said, during the war, a lot of war movies. But yeah, that was the big thing. We would go to the movies. It was 9 cents, and Daddy would, when I was real little, Daddy would take us. Dorothy and I would go, and then he'd pick us up. Later on, I'd ride my bicycle sometime. And right in front of the movie theater, they had a place just for bicycles, because most kids rode their bicycles to the movie. And Daddy would either come pick us up, or sometimes he'd just let us walk home. I mean, it was 4 blocks, you know. And you didn't worry about, there was nothing to worry about back then. It was so safe. The one thing I do remember with Dorothy, and she remembers this too, we went to see the movie The Thing. And The Thing was a story about a space alien, and James Arness, who's, you know, Mr. Dillon, he played the space alien. And you look at the movie now, it seems almost comical, but back then it was scary. Well, that day Daddy didn't come pick us up. We had to walk home. Well, we didn't walk. We ran. And even though Dorothy was a year and a half older than me, I beat her home.
Can you tell me about your kids?
Well, Jane and I got married in '57. We were living in a 1-room apartment. She was working for the Department of Public Safety. She was making $210 a month. I was working for the 2Js and going to school, and I was making $1.05 an hour. We were actually saving money because we were renting that apartment for $50 a month. And then, so we got married in August, and she found out that she was pregnant. And so, before we had a chance to really start making plans on how we were going to handle that, is when I was offered that job of manager of 2J. And one of the reasons that I took it. So we rented another apartment. And this time it was a garage apartment. It was 2 bedrooms. It was upstairs. It was $65 a month. It was furnished, so we didn't have to buy furniture. And my oldest son was born in August of that next year. Jane quit work because we could afford to live off of my income. I was making $350 a month, and they were paying me $150 a month bonus if I did a good job. So, believe it or not, $500 a month back then was a good income, was a good salary. It's hard to imagine that these days, but back then it really was. We managed to buy a new car, 1958. We bought our first new car,
What kind of
58 Ford Fairlane, black one. And then my boss talked me into buying a house. In fact, he helped me find the house to buy. We bought the house on Windsor Lane.
What?
Was it Winston Lane, wasn't it, Dan? Winston?
No, it was
Windsor?
no,
Windsor is a
no, it's
what's the moped?
Dorothy Westmore.
Westmore, yeah. Westmore Lane. Anyway, we bought that house. It was a 3-bedroom, 1 bath. We paid, I think, $10,000 for it. Our payments were $69 a month, just $4 more than our rent had been. We had to buy furniture, so we borrowed the money to buy the furniture. And when we moved into the house, we owed $400 for the furniture, and I think had $15 in the bank or something like that. But I had a job, and we just kind of went from there. I was working a lot of hours, but by then my sister had moved in with us. She wanted to move to Austin, so she moved in, and I told her she didn't have to pay any rent, but she was giving Jane money. I don't even know how much, just but Jane was taking her to work because Dorothy didn't have a car first, and then Dad bought her a car, and she lived with us for, I don't know, we were there 3 years or so, and then Jane got pregnant with my second son. He was born premature,
Uncle Dave.
Uncle David. And interesting story about them. David still tells a story, you may have heard it, about us deserting him on Christmas. Because we used to come to West for Christmas. And Mom and Dad and the family would gather at that old house at 407 South Main, and we'd sleep wall to wall, and Mom would fix Christmas dinner, and a good time was had by all. Well, David was born on December the 12th, 2 months premature, and he had to stay in the hospital for at least till he got to be 5 pounds, which is going to take at least 3 weeks. And so we had a decision to make. Do we go to West for Christmas without him for that one day, or do we stay in Austin? He was in the hospital. There's nothing we could do but visit him and watch him through the window. We didn't want to impose on everybody to try to come to Austin and change their plans in midstream. So we decided we'd come to West for that one day, which we did. We came down that morning and went back that night. And he still kids us about deserting him and leaving him there for Christmas by himself. That's another story. He was 5 pounds when we brought him home.
Wow.
And little tiny thing.
How old was Dad at that point?
See, Dan was born in 58. David was born in 61? Is that right, Dan?
I'm thinking he's 3.5 years older than me. I know.
Yeah, he was born in 61. I think that's right. Yeah, 3.5 years.
Okay.
And then came along Kathy. She was born in 63. And then we had a misfortune. We lost a baby, stillborn. That one hit me hard. That one hit me real hard. And we decided then we probably didn't want to have any more children because that really took it. But she got pregnant again with Darren, and that was a long 9 months with Darren. We were scared because we had just lost one, and we were afraid that it might happen again. And he was born in '66. So in 9 years, we had 5 children. One was born dead. And by then we had outgrown that house. Dorothy had gotten married, so she wasn't living with us anymore. So we bought a bigger house, bought a 4-bedroom, 3-bath home on Lansbury. And that's, by then I was working for Ralph Moreland. And I had a good income. Because when I moved to go into business for myself, I was making about $30,000 a year, which in 1970 was not bad.
Absolutely not.
Not bad.
Yeah.
And I had car and benefits and all that. So life in Austin was, we liked it. We hated to leave, but I had that urge to do our own thing, be our own boss.
What do you remember about Jane and raising kids, and what were your kids like?
Well, I always said we had 3 great kids. And who was the bad one? Well, they took turns. No, we had really proud of our family. Jane was the love of my life. I always told her, I said, you know, and this is kind of true. I used to play this game with myself when I was basically in college, because I didn't date very much. I had 2 dates in college before I met her, and I didn't date that much here in the West. But I always wondered what kind of woman I would marry. And as I meet people, I would say, how does she fit into if I took all the women in the world and lined them up, where does she fit in? It's kind of a game I played with myself. And when I met Jane, that's what I said. You came out number 1. And then there was number 2. And then there was the rest of the world. Now, who was number 2? That's Natalie Wood.
Yep.
Natalie Wood was number 2. Jane was number 1. So I used to tease her, if I had never met you and Natalie Wood still wanted to marry Robert Wagner, I'd probably still be single. But yeah, she was one of a kind. And we had a lot of ups, we had some downs, but this is something I probably don't want to get into too much, but it took 1.5 years of her, when she died, it took a lot out of me. And I never had a chance to grieve over her for about 15 years. And that's a lot of personal stuff there. But yeah, she was one of a kind. I wish she would have known her grandkids. I really do. But, you know, ours is not the reason why.
Amen.
So what's next?
Well, I was going to say, do you have, maybe you don't want to say, memories that you might have about Darren, or something silly you might remember about Kathy or anybody?
Oh, I have memories of just incidents that happen, and you know, some of them are funny, and some of them I don't know if I've ever told you the story about Darren. I've told it to Leslie. She thought it was hilarious. Dan probably remembers this. When we moved into that house that we built in Longview, I put up a basketball goal. And it was a piece of pipe that went up and like this, and we anchored, I put a basketball goal on top of it. Well, when we first put it in, we dug a hole. So I'm trying to, we dug the hole, put the pipe in there, and then poured concrete around it. Well, to keep it steady, tied some rope to the top of it and brought it down to 3 different stakes on the ground to hold it steady while the concrete dried. Darren at that time would have been 4 maybe, 3.5 or 4 years old. When the concrete dried, we went out there because they were all right, just ready to play basketball. So I started taking those stakes out of the ground so we could untie the ropes. 2 of them came out real easy, but the third one, like anything else, is always going to be a tough one. I could not pull it up. It was stuck in the ground because we had driven it in, stake about that long. So I finally got down on my hands and knees and I got on that thing and I started working it like this. And I felt it come loose. And I looked over there and Darren was just standing there watching me. So I got this idea. I said, Darren, go over here. I can't get this thing out. See what you can do. Do you remember this, Dan? So he goes over there and he gets down just like I did. And he grabs hold of that stake and he jerks up, and when he does, it comes out and he just goes tumbling.
Oh no.
He takes the stake, he picks it up, throws it down on the ground. He says, there, I've got to do everything around here. And that's the time when you wish you'd had a camera, because that was I'm surprised that he doesn't remember that. But yeah, that was very cute. That's the one thing I remember about Darren. I remember some bad things that Darren did too. But,
Sure.
but I remember him when he cut his head. He was raised up under the window. We had those windows that open. He raised up and he cut his head. Remember that, Dan?
Yeah.
We took him to the doctor. And the doctor put one of these sheets over him to tie him down, to hold him down. Because when you sew up the head, you didn't want him moving. So the doctor told me, hold him still. And I couldn't hold him still. He said, put a headlock on him. So I actually put a headlock on him. He was still moving. The doctor said, sit on him. He finally got him sewed up. But he was not a happy camper over that one.
Good night. Yeah.
But Uncle David was just an accident waiting to happen. I mean, David is so stitched up, and it's amazing he stays apart. He cut himself so many times. He was, like I say, he would almost look at something and cut himself. He had a lot of stitches.
Let's move on to teaching. Becoming a teacher.
Well, do you have anything to say though about Longview? Like moving out there and living out in that town?
Oh, it was very different. Longview is extremely clannish. A lot of rivalry between Longview and Tyler. I mean, it's so much so that you can't buy a Tyler newspaper in Longview or a Longview newspaper in Tyler. Tyler's dry, Longview was wet. That's not that way anymore, but it was back then. But I was a newcomer, and I faced a lot of opposition going into business. Yeah, I had to earn my way in that community. Yeah.
All of your kids graduated from high school.
From high school there, yes. Dan was the last one to graduate from the old high school. And it was very unfortunate because at the time we moved there, Longview was going through some really bad stuff, especially in school, because segregation had just ended and they were trying to integrate the schools, and they were having a lot. I don't remember all the stories, but there was something bad had happened at the Longview High School before we moved there about them burning the buses. But integration didn't go very well in Longview. He wasn't there, so he could probably tell you more about it.
Sure.
But I remember one of the girls that worked for us at the Tiki, that was going to high school there, she was telling us about having the police out in the hall and all that, and I said, how do you get an education under those conditions? She says, you don't, you just try to survive.
Wow.
But it was, yeah, but we were the outsiders coming in, and you know, it took a few years for us to, a very clannish town, extremely clannish.
How long did you live there? Like, did you move to Fort Worth after living there, or?
I moved to Fort Worth in 80, 87, 88. Lived there 17 or 18 years. Moved to Fort Worth in 78 or something like that. I mean 88 rather. 89 maybe. And I kind of just fiddled around. See, other than working at that delivery job and flipping hamburgers for 2J's at first, I never worked for anybody else. I'd always been my own boss. And I didn't want to get a job. I had some money, didn't have enough to, you know, make it the rest of the way, but I wanted to try unusual things, different things. I tried sales. I used to hate salesmen. And I said, but I'm going to try it because I want to see if I could do it. And I got pretty good at it. And once I got good at it, I didn't want to do it anymore. And I tried career counseling. Was pretty good at that for a while. And then I ran into a fella at the dentist's office one day that was telling me about getting a teaching certificate in teaching. And I didn't even realize you could do that. And I checked into it and ended up getting it, and 16 years later I was enjoying the heck out of it. Loved that job. Loved it.
What did you teach?
I taught high school math.
At what high school?
I usually answer that question by saying I taught children. Because teaching to me was not teaching a subject, it was getting kids to learn something. And I guess maybe that's one reason I was successful at it, because I don't agree with the education system in this country. I didn't agree with the education system in Fort Worth. So much of it was politics. In fact, probably 90% of it was politics. Most of the people that were in administration were interested in protecting their own jobs. And I saw so much money being wasted, that was just wasted, that could have been spent on the kids. And I didn't care about all that. I didn't even want to get involved in it. I just said, I love teaching kids. Please just close the door and leave me alone. That was my attitude. And so I kind of did my own thing in the classroom. And it worked because my kids were successful, and so they left me alone. But if I'd had to do it and had to follow all of the protocols that they wanted, I don't think I'd have liked it.
Right.
But I know even on my evaluation, there was a couple times they didn't even come in my classroom to evaluate me. My principal called me in one day. She said, I was supposed to do your evaluation. What do you want? What do you want me to put down here? You know, because I was graded pretty well like a teacher should be graded. How well do your kids succeed? Now, it took me about 3 or 4 years to get there. I was scared to death the first time I was in that classroom. But once I learned about kids are just kids. You know, people even tell me now, oh, you taught in an inner city school. Were you scared? I said, kids. I was more scared of my own kids than some of those kids. No, they're just kids. There's, you know. And so I didn't take it as just going in there and trying to teach a lesson, but to interact with the kids and make them want to learn that lesson. That was the attitude that I had. It didn't work all the time, but it worked most of the time. But I had to give it up. For health reasons, I just couldn't continue.
When did you retire?
10 years ago. Actually, I should have retired 6 months earlier, or a semester earlier, because my feet were giving out, but I wanted to try to give it one more year. I was walking with a cane already, and I was walking up and down stairs, and by the end of the semester, which was in December, I could see I wasn't going to make another full year. So I went and talked to the principal, and I said, I've got to give it up at the end of this semester. Well, as it turned out, I had enough sick days accumulated, because I didn't take sick days, didn't want to. I had enough sick days accumulated where I got paid for the whole semester this as a record teacher. And I was still the teacher of record. Although some other teachers took my place, he was still under my record. So I got taught a whole semester, got paid for a whole semester, and taught 3 days of it. And that's why I was able to spend the time coming to West and back and getting this house ready to move into and everything. Because at the time, I was getting paid just like I was working, but I wasn't working. So that worked out pretty good. But I'd rather have been working.
Sure,
I love it.
of course, yeah. Well, now your work is holding down the rockets at the senior center, or can you talk about what you do now in life, or?
No, I don't do a whole lot. I don't get out very much simply because it's hard for me to get around. I do go to the senior center usually for a couple hours a day because I like interacting with the people. I got interested in that right after I moved down here. A friend of mine that I had gone to school with knew that I'd moved back to town and came up and visited with me and says, come over and have coffee with us over at the bakery in the mornings. And I started going over there and visiting with friends. And he told me one day, he said, why don't you go down to the senior center for lunch? So he got me started there, and I started going there and met more people that I had known. And then about a year or so after that, the guy that was president had to quit. They asked me if I would be president for 2 months until they could elect somebody, and I didn't realize that was a lifetime appointment. And I said yes. And it's just a matter of holding a meeting once a week. Once a month. But I do that. I call bingo there twice a month, or twice a week rather. Have a lot of friends there. They just love to go there. We gossip, we talk politics, we laugh at each other, we tell jokes, but it's a lot of fun. And I know people around town. When I go to town, people know me. And I go to church regularly. Love to go to church. It's only 3 blocks or 4 blocks from here. And other than that, I stay home. I don't do a lot of reading because my eyesight is bad. Although I'm going to the doctor the day after tomorrow and hope to fix that.
Sure.
But I've done some reading. I buy some books on CD that I can listen to. I work a lot of puzzles. I play a lot of games on my computer. And I talk on the phone. Dorothy calls me about every day, and we talk about an hour. I talk to my cousin Millie. My cousin Angeline from Fort Worth calls me occasionally, and we visit. So I'm not lonesome. I'm not lonely. Mm-hmm. And I've got a lot of good memories.
Can I ask you a few questions I forgot to,
Sure.
Since I feel like we've worked from your grandparents up till now, present day.
Okay.
So reflecting on all that, what is the thing you, other than your family, are most proud of? Remember I was thinking about that question.
I thought about that when you asked me. I'm glad you didn't ask it the other way, because I wouldn't answer that. What are the things that you're least proud of? Because I've done some things that I'm not very proud of in my life. But the most proud of, I think I can honestly say, other than family, was when I graduated from high school and made valedictorian. and when I made the All-State band in high school. And the reason I say that, it made my parents so proud. And I really did it for them. I really wanted to succeed for them. And I remember the day I got that call from the principal at West High School that I was valedictorian. I was in the living room of that house, and I jumped up and actually scraped my knuckles on the ceiling. I was that happy. And I ran in there and hugged my mom. Man, I had the same feeling when I made All-State, because I wanted it so bad, because my dad wanted me there.
Yeah.
I'm real proud of those two accomplishments. I've now been proud of a lot of things that I've done. I think those two stand out the most for me. And then, of course, having the courage to ask Jane for that first day. That I'm proud of.
I forgot to ask, what was your first car?
And Dad gave me an old 46 Chevrolet when I got my first job at 2J, so I'd have for transportation. That was his car, and he had bought him a new one. And I had that one till right before we got married. Dad got this car for him. It was a 52 Ford. And that's the car we traded in on that 58 Ford after we got married. Bought a 58 Ford was the first new car. And I kind of went crazy with buying new cars after that. I had so many new cars, I probably couldn't even name them all.
Can you think of any other stories or anything special that you want to make sure to share?
Oh, I could talk all day as far as that, but I think we've pretty well covered the highlights. Are there some pictures you wanted me to look at? Or?
Oh, yeah.
There are. I just want to make sure you got questions all done.
Actually, I forgot this one. When you were growing up, who was your favorite relative?
This may sound kind of funny, but it was Uncle Joe Petros. That was my grandmother's brother-in-law. And I can't really tell you why. I just always had a real admiration for that guy.
He was a very dapper-looking guy too.
Yeah, I remember.
That's what I like about him.
I remember.
I just remember those pictures. That mustache.
I went to see him. Gosh, it must have been in 50. I think I was already in college when we went to Shiner with Mom and Dad. Maybe I was in high school. But he had just bought a new Ford, a new car. And he let me drive it. He drove Daddy and them around. He let me drive his new car. And I remember I invited him to our wedding, and he came to our wedding. He came up from Shiner to go to our wedding. I just thought he was just a great character. That's my Aunt Lucy. That's
Oh, with the wooden leg.
with the wooden leg, right?
Bless you. Did she always have crutches?
I've never seen her. This is the only time I've seen her with crutches.
What is
So I don't know when that picture was taken, but that's who that is. She took care of Dorothy and I when we were real little. She had the wooden leg.
I guess I just can't understand what's going on in that picture.
I don't know. I really don't know.
Tell us about that car.
The car had a rumble seat in the back where you could sit in it instead of a trunk to put stuff in. It just turned out to be a seat. It was like a convertible back there.
Oh, what kind of car is that?
I think it's a Chevrolet, but I'm not sure. It's an old car.
Isn't that your dad's first car?
You know, it could be. It could be. Back then, all cars pretty well looked alike. So, like I say, I don't know when that picture was taken exactly.
Okay.
So,
Oh, I could tell you. It was
Thir-
think so.
Well, that'd be the year I was born.
No, I'm sorry, 1927.
Oh, well, that's way before I was born. How do you know that?
Because it's got the year up at the top.
Oh,
I
okay.
put it in the title.
Well, if 27, yeah, that would be, yeah, that's 9 years before I was born. So that's,
Such an interesting picture.
yeah.
It's cool.
See, I don't know how old she was when she lost that leg. I just remember she had the wooden leg when she took care of us. Yeah. Now that's my Aunt Albina, my Uncle Charlie, my Aunt Millie, who's the baby, and my dad.
It looks like Charlie's wearing a uniform.
He was in the Army. Yeah.
So that's the
Albina.
Klajinsky side?
No, that's the Foyt side.
Sorry.
And
Yeah,
missing
that's
from
good.
missing are
Anton.
John, the oldest, and it's Millie and Albina, and who was the other one?
Lucy.
Lucy. Yeah, the one with the wooden leg.
A lot of kids.
Mm-hmm.
Millie looks pretty attractive there. How old do you think
Millie
she
was a beautiful woman.
Yeah, she looks like she's maybe 19 in that picture. Was she the old? She was the youngest.
She was the youngest, yeah.
Yeah.
Oh, she was beautiful, yeah. And she was a true Foyt, stubborn as a mule. Yeah, yeah. She was something else.
Wait, oh good.
And that's a picture of my Frank Hubik and my mother's sister Mary. And I don't know all the people in this picture, but that's my mother on the right, extreme right. She was in the wedding party, and my dad. And I don't know who the other people are except the bride and groom.
That's a beautiful picture. Wow.
That's Julius's mom and dad. Mary was a nice looking lady. Well, that whole family were nice looking.
So it was Mary Klajinsky, and then she married
Hubik, Frank Hubik.
Frank. Oh, now that makes sense because he was Julian Hubik.
Julius.
Julius, sorry.
And that, Dorothy says that's Pearl's sister. Is that right? I think. See,
I can look it up. Not sure, but I think that's right.
I don't. Oh, I'll forget.
Oops. That's going to be Pearl and Josie Klajinsky. So that's what we're saying, 1933.
Yeah. It's not somebody that I remember. But that's my grandmother on the right. That I do know.
Do you know
Oh,
where
and then your great
that
aunt.
picture was taken?
No. That landscape doesn't look familiar at all.
Okay.
We're gonna. Now that is Mom and Dad's wedding.
Wow.
And I don't know the other people there.
You don't?
He looks familiar, but that's Aunt Helen. I recognize her.
Yeah, on the groom side.
And this young man, I've seen him in pictures, but I don't.
Yeah, but Helen should be on the bright side. Okay.
Well, maybe they just put the bridesmaids on the.
Yeah.
And that's Helen and Antone. I was 10 years old when that picture was taken.
Wow.
I served I was an altar boy at their wedding. I danced the night away at the SBJST Hall at their wedding. I remember that one very well. This is Dan, you remember at Julius's funeral?
Yeah.
Those three women that came up and talked to us, the three sisters,
Mm-hmm.
this was their mother.
Okay.
What's her name? She was a good friend of Helen's. Matula, Evelyn Matula.
Yeah.
That's her.
She looks a little different now.
Yeah. She's in the rest home in Waco now.
Wrong button.
Wrong button. That's Aunt Millie and Uncle Jake.
Wow. Huh. She's still pretty.
Yes, she is. And I think that's the only picture taken of me and Dorothy where I was shorter than her.
Oh my God. Oh, Papa, you're so cute.
Do you remember taking that picture?
No, Dorothy does.
Why are y'all dressed like that?
Mom bought us those little sailor outfits and took us to Urbanowski's and took our picture.
The Urbanowskis are the local.
The studio, it was a local studio, yeah.
Yeah, by the way, weren't there some Urbanowskis that lived down the street from you?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, 2 houses away.
Was that the same Urbanowskis or was that a different?
No, that was a different Urbanowski.
Okay.
Well, Richard and Larry Urbanowski worked for me at 2J. Do you remember? You don't remember them? They'd come over to the house at times. You don't remember them?
No.
They're the ones that lived down the street from us. That's Grandmother Foyt. And the cute one is me,
Yeah.
and that's my sister Dorothy.
What do you remember about her? I've seen so few pictures of her.
I just remember she was nice and warm in the wintertime to snuggle up close to.
She looks like a big, warm person.
Yes, she was.
What
She
was
was
her first name again?
Amelia
Amelia. Her maiden name was Wolf, correct?
Wolf, yeah.
Grandma Wolf. She lived with y'all when you were there?
Till I was in the 5th grade, yes. And that is my dad, Annie, John's wife, grandmother Pearl, Dorothy, Anton Pica, and me.
You're so tall.
That was taken in Fort Worth at Anton's house.
Do you remember being taller than all your other family members?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I do.
Was that me taking the picture?
You know, I don't know who took that picture.
Pearl looks small too.
She was.
She
It
was
tiny,
really
tiny.
small.
Now, I don't know these girls in here. That's Jane and May, of course. And these were friends. That's friends of Jane. They lived with them at co-op, and I don't. This one was also named Jane, but I don't know her name. Richard Berger was my best man. He was my best friend. And then Richard Yeshek lived with me. He was 4 years older than me, and so was Larry. But they went to school. They went to the service first, and they went to college, and so we went to college together. But they had been in the service first. And Jimmy and I used to. He had a car. He lived at Talon with me, and because he had a car, I drove to West and back a lot with him. I got to come home and visit a lot.
You're also the tallest in that picture.
Yeah.
What church is that?
That's here in West. That picture was taken on our wedding day at Lake Travis, September '57.
Where did you go on your honeymoon?
There was a man that was managing 2J at the time was named Price, and he had a cabin out on Lake Travis, and he let us use that cabin. We left west actually early that afternoon and drove to Austin. And he had a boat out there. So we just got into some casual clothes and got on that boat and rode around Lake Travis. And when we got back, that's when I took that picture of her.
Man, that's a treat. Like a sailboat, a motorboat?
It was a motorboat.
Oh,
Yeah.
man. Oh, that's so cute. It's so adorable.
That's Jane. That's Dorothy. That's Mom. And that's Miss Pilner. I can't remember her first name.
Right click on it. Go to
I
properties.
think.
This one here.
Yeah. Okay.
Put the arrow on the picture and right click.
Oh, yeah.
Lillian Polchak. Father Polchak's sister. I'm trying to figure out where that one was taken. That's my 58 Ford. No, it's not. No, it's not.
We'll get to that in a minute.
All right, there is the Klajenskis.
That's a great picture.
That's grandmother.
Right at the bottom,
Pearl.
It's Pearl. And that's John.
to the left.
That's Helen to the right. And that's mother, Tony, and Mary. Mary Hooley.
So that's all of them.
That's all of them. I took that picture in Fort Worth.
There's like 100 copies of that picture.
Yeah. You can see Helen and Anton's wedding picture in the background there on the mantle.
Oh, sure enough.
That
And-
picture shows up in everybody's collection on the Klaczynski side.
Yeah.
Yeah, I've seen that before myself.
Oh,
I don't
wow.
know if you can remember all those people, and you can skip that one if you want. I've pretty much got all those people identified if you right click.
That's Sally Klajenski. That's Tony's wife. That's Mary. That's Jane in the background. And that's Sharon and Jill Ann right there. That's Tony's kid. I mean, John's kids. And that's Annie. That's their mother. I used to babysit with her when she was a tiny baby. That's my dad. That's John Klajenski. It's Tony Klajenski. Julius. Anton Pija. And the good-looking one is me.
Oh, yeah. Oh, I couldn't tell. So two of their kids.
I was skinny back
Where was
then.
that taken?
That was also taken in Fort Worth.
At the Pija's house?
At the Pija's house, yeah.
What's the year on that? So that's right on the side.
Looks like 58.
58, yeah, December 58.
How old were you in that picture? Did you always
20,
You're
22,
23.
did you always cross your arms and look at the camera that way?
probably. December 20, 58. That would have been. Do you remember that picture of you that's got the 1 on it? That was taken at the same time.
Y'all were y'all just getting together in Fort Worth
For Christmas. For Christmas.
Oh.
Where'd y'all stay that Christmas? Or where did I stay that Christmas? Did I stay at
We didn't stay in Fort Worth. We just went there for the day. Probably stayed in the West.
Looks like a Texas Christmas though. Everybody's not wearing a coat.
Yeah. That's a picture taken at 2J. The fellow there is a fellow named John Marshall that I work with. This guy's wife stayed with Jane the day she was feeling bad when she was pregnant with David. And she's the one that took Jane to the hospital when David was born premature. I was at work and they called me and I met them at the hospital. And while I did all the paperwork, they took her upstairs and she had the baby. By the time I got up there, David had been born. I'm going to tell you something. Don't ever tell David this. He's the only one of my kids I saw before they cleaned him up. I mean, he was little, he was tiny, he was bloody, and he was ugly.
Yeah. Now
Wow.
they're all like that.
Yeah.
That's scary.
It was. I mean, little bitty thing. It scared the fool out of me because, you know, but, you know, like I say, he was all bloody, and, you know, no kid is pretty right when they're first born. It scared the fool out of me. But anyway, it was his wife that went with her to. And that's Dorothy's wedding.
You could, I don't know how that one got in there, but anyways, I've already identified all those people, so unless you just want to,
I don't know them all.
I mean, unfortunately, I probably do, but.
You back up. You back up. This one, that's Jane. That's me. That's Ralph Moreland, who I worked for.
Right,
That's-
Walnut Jr., by the way. Right.
No,
No?
no, not Junior. And that's his wife Lono, his first wife. And that picture was taken in Miami, Florida.
For what occasion would that be?
Kentucky Fried Chicken Convention. The day of that's the day, 2 days after Super Bowl #2, which was played in Miami. We flew over it on the way in. She was a good-looking woman.
Yeah. She has beautiful blonde
So
hair.
that's Ralph Sr.?
There's not a Ralph Jr.
Well, no, it's his dad, though. I mean,
His dad was Pat.
Pat, I'm sorry, that's
Yeah.
what I meant.
Yeah,
Oh, so that is Ralph.
that
Okay.
is Ralph. Yeah.
Oh, okay, right. Okay, fair enough. I got you. Not for some reason.
Wow. God. It's a lot of children.
Who's that kid back there with the bird haircut?
Yeah, are you looking in your folder? Yeah, yes you are.
This is what you gave me.
Okay.
That's Suzanne and Kathy and David and Darren and Big Dan there and
Where
Dorothy.
was that at? Where was that picture taken?
I'm thinking that was taken at Dorothy's.
I'm thinking it was taken at 2600 Lansbury,
Did we have those kind of curtains?
but I'm willing to defer to you on that.
See, I don't remember this seat. That's why I'm saying.
Gosh,
It may have been, Dan.
So
I don't remember the seat and I don't remember the curtains.
Yeah.
Uncle Darren is so tiny.
Okay.
And that's the magic combo. That's my mom on the piano. That's Jane on trumpet. Me on tenor sax. And what were you playing there, Dan? Drums?
Drums.
Well, that's you playing drums. Who is that?
I think that's probably David.
What was he playing?
Did Jane play trumpet in college too?
Just in high school.
And that's your mom?
That's my mom.
And that was what, Christmas?
I think it was, yeah.
Oh, I know it was.
Yeah.
It was Christmas of 1967. So who are those four handsome devils?
That's LaForge. Is that LaForge's?
No, that is your four kids. I hope so.
Is that David?
Yep.
He looks really goofy.
I recognized you, but it doesn't
That
look
is-
like David, does
That
it?
is the Easter of 1968.
Look how tiny Darren
Yeah, all right, there. Yeah, but that doesn't look like David.
is. Was Kathy like girly? Would she wear dresses?
Yes.
Dad,
No,
what
it's
kind of
dated.
collar do
It's
you
Christmas of Easter of 68.
He might be getting his first communion because he has that sick on.
That's Jan and I in Hawaii,
Why did you go to Hawaii?
KFC convention.
Did you have a good time there?
Oh yes.
That's cool. Have you been to Hawaii before or after that?
I've been since. I've been there twice.
What'd you guys do?
Well, when we went, we stayed about 3 days at the convention, the different activities. We went to a luau and all that. And then we took a tour of Maui and the island of Hawaii, up in Mauna Loa, volcano and city of Hilo. And we were there over a week, a little over a week altogether.
You still have that shirt?
No. Now I have, for the life of me, I can't remember where this picture was taken.
Ted, that's taken at your parents' house in their kitchen.
No, it wasn't.
Yes, it is.
Are you sure?
Yeah.
So I see you
'Cause I
right in the
don't-
middle.
There was a vaulted ceiling in that kitchen.
No, it wasn't vaulted. It was just tilted so that the rain would fall off of it. But yeah, that's Christmas of 1975.
Right.
So
I just don't remember us sitting in the kitchen playing dominoes.
who's
Go
that
ahead.
sitting next to you on your left?
Go ahead and name off who all those people are. and then I
Okay.
can do it.
Well, that's Kathy. I don't know who that long-haired guy is, that long-haired hippie there. That's Leroy. Me and Dad, Mom, Helen.
Yeah, that's your dad.
That's
Oh.
David.
That's Suzanne at the bottom too. That's my kid.
Okay. Yeah, that's Suzanne. What is that? Is that Kathy back there?
I don't know who's that by Leroy. Oh, that's me. Okay.
That's you.
Yeah. That's Darren. Next.
This is Darren here. That's
Yeah.
David there.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's Suzanne. You're right. That's my dad. I guess you're right, Dan.
I'd be willing to bet you a dozen donuts.
Because the stove was right here. I didn't think that room was that big.
It's not that big.
That's why everybody crammed in that.
That's another reason who Darren, as short as he is almost in that picture as tall as Helen, because the floor slanted.
Oh my god.
You walked in there, you were walking downhill.
Oh man.
All right, moving on.
That's awesome.
That's actually the same. No, it's not. I think that might be a different.
I don't know. It probably is exactly the same. I see the low
That
ceiling
is
on
the
that
same.
wall.
That's the same room.
Yeah.
And look, you can see the stove. It's right there. And you can see the vaulted ceiling.
Yeah.
And
so-
you could see the leaning floor.
Yeah.
Let's just note that right now.
Yeah. So name all those people. I mean, I know.
Well, that's Mary and Frank and Mom and Helen and is that me?
In the back?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. When was that? That was what? I can tell you real quick. It's Christmas. Okay. It's Christmas of '78.
All right. There's me and the hippie and Leroy,
Oh, we look so young.
Kathy, Dorothy. Who are those two people? Who?
Suzanne. That's Mom. That's Jane. That's Dorothy.
You're kidding.
Kathy.
I bust need glasses. That's Suzanne.
Yeah. I mean, I'll double check it, but I'm pretty sure.
And that's Jane? Well, yeah, now that I get closer.
Yeah, that's Suzanne.
Wow.
Yep. I mean, who else would be in that picture?
Yeah, I mean, I see it now. When I was backing up here,
And then where was that picture taken?
was that at Dorothy's maybe?
It's at 1302 Amherst. No, it's in Longview.
Was it in Longview?
There's that.
Oh, yeah,
stereo.
okay, I know where, yeah. Yeah,
I mean,
that's the stereo back there.
Right.
Yeah, okay. When you put this many candles on your birthday cake, some of those memories go away,
I
Dan.
can't imagine.
Now this one was in Fort Worth, right?
No. That's Christmas of 1979. That's at Aunt Dorothy's house.
Was it in Dorothy's?
Wow, you're right. Back, oh man, I've never
So
seen
can you
those
name-
panels on wood.
Well,
That's
yes,
great. I
that's-
didn't think I could do this better than you, Dad, but
That's
Go ahead.
Jomer and Alice Almquist, and that's Jane and me, and Mom and Helen. And is that you?
no. That's Darren.
Oh, little Darren.
Oh, okay.
I guess Darren got to eat at the big people's table.
Y'all were eating at the kids' table, is that right?
That's exactly it. Yep, that's it.
Back there.
Alright, we could play the picture game for a couple hours if we wanted to. Alright, well I'm good.
Good.